All right, mates, welcome back to the channel. JL Scott Fishing and Eats. Hope everybody's doing well. Oh, man, so much going down. It has been kind of crazy this week. All these announcements, all this stuff. Tournaments wrapping up. Schedules getting set for next year. Bassmaster Elite Series. Finally, all that stuff's all the changes have kind of happened with Bass. They've gotten kind of trickled out in the last month or two with everything that's going to happen. With a lot of the changes that are going down just in professional fishing at large. So they've come out with the Elite Series for 2023, and we now have the full Elite Series field for 2023, expanded field to 104 anglers. There was some question a few weeks ago when they were talking about payouts and talking about all that stuff about what the payout was going to be on the top trail, right? And then also how many anglers there were going to be, whether they were going to increase the anglers or decrease the anglers, decreasing the payouts, what the payout percentage was going to be on a lot of the professional tours for 2023. So if you're a fan, like most of us are fans, most of us follow, doesn't matter where we are in reality in the fishing community, you basically want to just kind of digest a little bit, in terms of, really like these tours, there's still a lot of people in both the Bassmaster Elite Series and the MLF Pro Tour that most people are unfamiliar with, and a lot of new names now. I think more so than at any time that I can remember. You've got now more new names and new mechanisms and vehicles to get people into like the Elite Series, as well as obviously the Bassmaster Classic, and as well as obviously the Red Crest on the MLF side. And there's probably been a lot less change on the lower side events in terms of you have to work your way up, of course. With like BFL and MLF, there has been some changes. Obviously, we know that about the Open Series for Bass, and a lot of those guys are in this mix now that have qualified through the Open Series. So there is legitimacy there that you can see that path. And there was some question a few weeks ago about, okay, we're going to spend, 30, 40,000, 26 to $40,000, whatever, to compete all of the opens. So I think 9 opens, right? Instead of having be able to compete in just 3, and then have the potential of popping in and moving your way up. Now you have to compete all 9 in order to qualify for the Elite Series field for 2024 and beyond. So that's created another dynamic here, but the pathway is set. You've got people here. In a couple highlights that they've highlighted here. They had a record-breaking season in 2022, and I say quietly, unless you've been really, really dialed in. 2022 was a weird coming out of COVID. Everything's kind of weird. 2021 and 2022 were just weird years, I think, in the fishing community. A lot of things changed. A lot of things, because of COVID and all that stuff coming out of that from 2020 into 2021. And then, a lot of things were up in the air. But they had 4 brand new champions in 2022. Okay. And the total purses in 2022 were around 18.5 million. The purses were, the purses generated were obviously up, and they had over 18.5 million views via their agreements with Fox. So you've got Fox and Fox Sports channels and all that. So that's an interesting component right there, that a lot of people, those views are still pretty rock solid. And probably more so, I would have thought, more so coming in through COVID. A lot of people, depending on where you live in the country, obviously, some countries did not shut down at all. Some states, like my state, just were kind of ridiculous with a lot of things. You could only fish for food for a big portion of COVID. Just absolute stupidity when it came to things like that, especially with outdoors. Okay, totally can understand the indoor thing until they figured it out, but the outdoors, hopefully we've learned some lessons there. So a lot of people that have been following the Bass Elite Series, you kind of know how it's gone. And so with everything in the last few weeks, and you can find any number of videos on Elite Series pros and MLF Pro Tour pros with commentary from the actual in the angler field perspectives on a lot of these things. And they're interesting to listen to, especially for someone who's not competing on those tours. If you have aspirations of competing on those tours, to get perspectives of people that are involved in those tours. And I've said for a long time, and I know, trust me, I get pushback, but you know, but you know, the biggest elephant in the room and the biggest question in the room is the tour, or is the series, or is the tour really for the angler? That's inevitably the question that always is looming out there. And so some people see things from that perspective. If you're on the tour or in the series, doesn't matter what you're in, and then the perspectives of the actual series itself, people who run it, and then the perspective of people like myself that are on the outside, kind of like just looking at all the chessboard and looking at the pieces on the board, right? Um, and so it's one of those things where I don't know the answer. I used to think it was. I used to think it was about the anglers when I was a kid growing up. Getting taken to the Bassmaster Classic in Richmond, Virginia for like years in a row. Traveling to go see the Bassmaster Classic. When it was in it was in North Carolina, or I will go to Knoxville. But as a kid, I always just thought it was for the like I was like, because as a kid, you're like, you're yourself are playing your sports, right? There was no mechanism for kids, right? You know what I mean? It's just like it was up there with like professional football and professional baseball as a kid growing up. But it was something you actually could like relate more to because it was an activity that you actually did, right? And so you wanted to believe that these tours and these series were for the anglers as a kid, right? Because it was like that's what you saw. It was like a light show, right? It was like awesome. They're bringing the boats into the Coliseum, and guys are lifting bass out of the live well, and all it was a show, right? I think a lot of people think like in the last like decade or so they've gotten away from that entertainment value, okay? And they've tried to transition, both of them have, to this new format of streaming and on the water and internet and all these things. And so some people, older folks like myself, yeah, I'm older, they can draw back to our experiences from Bassmaster Classics in the late 70s and 80s and 90s, okay? We're the ones who kind of think that the things have been kind of diminished a little bit. Everything has to evolve, everything has to change, okay? We got to accept that. But it would be nice to get back to, a lot more of those weigh-ins, a lot more of that engagement and families and all that, because that's really what, in my opinion, set fishing apart when I was growing up, was the family atmosphere, and the accessibility to anglers. I mean, I have pictures of me with Gary Klein and Rick Clun and Woo Daves and as a kid that I absolutely cherish. And meeting those people just for a split instant, right? As opposed to other professional athletes. That, you know, you're gonna wait in line and maybe you gotta pay to get an autograph from a former professional football player or baseball, whatever the case may be. It's just a different thing. And so this is the new crop, the new 104 elite series anglers, that many would consider to be the top professional angling tour / series in the country. Now there's arguments made, but that's the reality, because of the branding of Bassmaster. Okay. And I think if you ask most guys, that would be the target of where they would, if they could fish in one event, it would be the Bassmaster Classic. If they could fish in one tour for a season and they could pick them all, I mean, and you've never fished in any of them. Let me qualify that. You've never fished in any of these events before, so you don't have any understanding or maybe relationship with any of the particular management organizations. Most people would say the Bassmaster Classic, and most people would probably say the Bassmaster Elite Series field. So next year in 2023, you're going to have 104 Elite Series anglers competing for almost $7 million purses, $7 million purses over the course of the season. And remember, last season they had 4 new champions. So that's pretty incredible. And they had, I think, 7 or 8 anglers reach the century mark during events last year. So what's that tell you about the fish? What's that tell you about the scheduling as well of last year was outstanding. To have that kind of result. And so you had 4 anglers retire from the Elite Series field. Okay. So 4 anglers retired. You have the exemption or exception. I always get those 2 words confused when we talk about stuff like that because you're basically making an exception, not an exemption. But Larry Nixon will be entering the Elite Series field. Legacy, through the Legacy program of a longtime angler, obviously, and one of the best anglers historically in bass fishing. I don't think you have. I can't think off the top of my head any of the anglers leaving that haven't retired, but I don't think there are any anglers that leaving for another circuit. I don't think so. If anyone knows of that, hit me up. Let me know or comment in the video field. So you got Jason Christie coming back, Brandon Polinick. You got the names. Okay, now we'll see what happens with the change of formats and change of all that coming to bass. What kind of implication that could have on bass in general, like bass fishing in general. We'll see what kind of implication that has on champions or top 10 finishes for a lot. Obviously everyone is very familiar with live scope, and that is kind of the direction that some of these top trails are running to. And now you're starting to see that technology trickle its way down, even all the way, okay, to the entry. And then also now you're seeing it in the kayak fishing community as well. So it started. It's expensive. Guys got 2 and 3 and 4, so it's interesting to see that on the front of the boats now. People have complained about how that's boring television, boring live stream to see a guy staring at his, at the front of his boat. That's going to be an interesting debate in 2023. I think that debate will continue, but I also think as that debate continues, these anglers are going to have to develop. Most of them have, obviously, some are better than others, but as anglers coming up through the various fields are going to have to develop that skill set. I just think that's the direction until something happens. That's probably the direction it's going to. So you've got 2 international anglers coming in from Japan and Canada. They earn those spots through the Northern and Southern Opens, respectively. So you've got your Northern, your Southern, and your Central next year. 3 events. We've gone over that schedule. Anglers are going to be competing in all 9 in order to get qualification into the Elite Series from the different divisions, I would think. And there's probably AOI. For that. You also have a Junior Bassmaster World Championship, and as well as your Opens. So, and then you also have your college now. So that so many developments have happened in the last 5-6 years, with the expansion set with both MLF and Bass, I think. And we'll see how it goes. You've got entry into Elite Series from the Bass Nation Championship that was held on Pickwick Lake. So that's another avenue for that. Obviously, I talked about Nixon, and you've got the Angler of the Year title, like I've said before. That would have been Keith Poche for bass, and then you had the Central Open. Central Open standings winner was Bradley Hallman. Pretty neat cat. I've only bumped into him once, and that's at a James River event. But he's a funny dude. Check out his channel on YouTube. Seems like a good guy, really good guy. Oklahoma. Like I said, I bumped into him one time when he was at an event down back home. I think it was an open I think it was an open on the James River. I don't think it was a bass, regular bass event. Like it was an open series, not a. But he used to be on the Elite Series. Probably, I want to say 10 years ago, and then he left for FLW, and now it's back. He's back in the Elite Series field. So well done there. I really enjoy his channel and his videos. He puts a really good twist on, the life, being a bass angler in the life, a day in the life, as opposed to just a bunch of videos on the water that everybody does catching fish. So let me run this through so people understand kind of where the Elite Series event is at. Each tournament will begin with a full field of anglers on days 1 and 2 before the field is cut to 50. So from 104 to 50 for the semifinal round on day 3. And then the top 10 remaining anglers were fished the final day with $100,000 first prize per event. So day 1, day 2, 104 anglers. Day 3, field gets cut to 50. Day 4, it drops to 10 anglers. Will this be the last season that there will be 4-day tournaments? That is another question. That unfortunately, have I talked about before, and I know I'm kind of like one of the only people talking about this because of my prior background in history, just in the political side of things over the years. There is a push. Okay, there is a push to limit the number of days on certain bodies of water in certain parts of the country, especially mine, in the Mid-Atlantic and the Northeast, to protect the fisheries. That there is that push, and so this will be interesting to see if there any changes happen for 2024 in terms of anglers being on the water for 4 days. And remember, anglers aren't going to be on the water for 4 days, mates. Anglers are actually probably going to be on the water for a lot more than that when you factor in the number of boats pre-fishing for events, right? So that was the last argument that I heard presented by those against these tournaments at some of these localities, okay, that have had these events for a while. But it's also good to see that the tours are starting to go to a little bit off the core areas a little bit on the schedules. And that could be a strategy way that they kind of see things coming that way too, that in certain places, like potentially the Potomac, for example, or the Upper Bay, which bass fishes when it opens at sometimes. Things could be limited next year or in 2024 in the spring to summer months in those fisheries. And so people will definitely have to keep an eye on that. So you go down right here, you can kind of see what we got. And again, I've kind of made this comment. I know I've gotten a lot of people kind of reach out to me and kind of ask like what my perspective really has been. Where do we think we go in the Northeast? I don't really know the answer to that question. I just don't know if the drive culturally, we have these things in different parts of the country regionally. Whether or not in the Northeast there really is as big a cultural push to get to the Bassmaster Classic or the Elite Series growing up as there is in the Southeast on the coast, and then obviously in the South. And because when you look at the MLF Pro Tour, like I've spoken to before, there's really only 2 anglers from the region of the from Virginia north to Maine, okay? David Dudley in Virginia, and then the New Jersey Angler for the Pro Tour, and that's it. There's no other Northeastern anglers on the MLF Bass Pro Tour. Now, when you look at the Elite Series field, there is, especially from Virginia, you've got John Cruz from Virginia. You've got Ed Loughran he's a lawyer from my hometown in Richmond, Virginia. He's back on the tour. You've got Brian from Maryland. But let's go down the list here. So you got Matt, Justin, you got Florence, Alabama, South Carolina, Todd Alton, Drew Benton, Stetson Blaylock, obviously from Arkansas. Scott Canterbury's been on the tour. Alabama, Brendan Curd, Hank Cherry, obviously. Jason Christie's back. Joey Cifuentes the third. That's a new, I think that's new. Let me double check that really quick. I think he qualified through Southern Opens. Bryant Smith and Joey Cifuentes qualified through the Bassmaster Southern Open. So congratulations to them. Gary Klaus, Rick Clun, Brandon Cobb, Keith Drew Cook, John Cox, obviously, John Cruz, like I said. Bunch of Alabama boys, again, just like the Bass Pro Tour. Clint Davis, Will Davis Jr., Greg DePalma. So you guys, there's another New Jersey guy right there. So you got Greg DePalma, John Cruz, Ed Loughran. There's your two, Kayoya and Cooper from Japan and Canada in there. There's your international anglers from that series. Mike Iaconelli back on the Elite Series Tour from New Jersey. So you got Virginia and New Jersey. That's really, Jonathan Kelly from Old Forge, Pennsylvania. But I don't think there's anything above that. There's Ed right there. Brian New, South Carolina, Larry Nixon. Okay, we talked about Brandon Polnick. Obviously, that's Idaho. Oh, I'm sorry, Jacob. I apologize. I always freaking missed Jacob from Prince George, Virginia. So you got some Virginia guys in there in the Bass Elite. And that's where the line is for me. Like, that Potomac River, for me, growing up. Remember, I grew up in Loudoun County in Northern Virginia for most of my life before I moved to Richmond, okay? But I always noticed that as a kid. You get to that Potomac River, and that's always been kind of like the old Civil War, Mason-Dixon water line, okay? Like, if you were on the other side of the freaking Potomac River, you were a Yankee. Like, that's, although Northern Virginia looks more like Maryland and the North than it does the South, okay? That's just true that. But growing up there, that's the way it was. I mean, that's the way it was, especially with fishing and things like that. Like, people that lived there in the northern part back in the 70s, they looked south. They didn't look north, like in terms of their cultural identity and things of being outdoors and fishing and hunting and sports and everything. There was still that back then. Now it's kind of murky and cloudy, but that line kind of still is kind of, a barrier. If you think about it, if you look at the number of anglers north of the Potomac River in the top tour of MLF and the number of anglers above the Potomac River in the Bass Elite Series, it's kind of hard not to recognize that fact. There's just not that many. Obviously, Alabama, Texas, North Carolina, Jake Whitaker, David Williams, but that's where you got it. You got one angler from Pennsylvania, and that's it. And it's same as Avenat with friggin' the BBT, okay, the Bass Pro Tour for MLF, New Jersey. That's it. So where all that Northeast doesn't have any representation at all. And so there's been a lot of people. I would say a lot of people. There's been some people, and I've always been kind of like, I just want to see the best of the best, right? Just want to see the best of the best. But as I get older, I'm also kind of understanding that how do you grow if your true intention is to grow and you're already going to these events, Lake Champlain, Lake Oneida, Cayuga, Erie. You're going to these events, St. Lawrence River, okay? You're going to these events But you don't have any angler representation really whatsoever from that part of the country. So what do you do? Like at some point, that was kind of like the thing about was like, well, the Northern Open, the Central Open, the Southern Open, that would be about, here's the thing to do would be, wouldn't it be, again, just spitballing here, and I know a lot of people will absolutely hate this idea, because everybody wants as much of an opportunity to qualify for the Bassmaster Elite Series, Bassmaster Classic, Redman, or Redcrest, sorry, or the MLF Pro Tour as possible, and I totally get that. But why would you not make it regionally? Meaning you have to live in the North to fish the Northern Opens. You have to live in the Central to fish the Central Opens. You have to live in the South to fish the Southern Open, or create another division where there's a lot more people. So a Southern and a Southwestern and a Central and a Northern, but make it so it's demographically so you can get anglers in those regions fishing. Now, the reason why that's not going to happen is you've just went to an all 9. You've got to fish all 9 anyway, right? So that's an easy solution to solve what a couple people were kind of saying, and I kind of was at odds with it, because I was kind of like, nah, it should just be the best of the best. Because when you fish these major Elite Series events, you got to go all over the country. Okay, so you got to be a balanced angler all over the country. Okay, so I was just kind of like, but then as I kind of like got to think about it, that would not be a bad thing to get to somehow. I don't know how it would work, but like make it demographically so people are competing at some level, to get to. They don't have a championship, right? So that would have been the better, in my opinion, like cool. So Northern, Central, whatever, and then there's a random, think about this, a random event like where a selection show where they select the location of the championship. And then the top of all them then go to the championship, and then the people in the championship, however how many down, also have a shot to get in the Elite Series, right? So you can get in from your region, maybe the top 3 from each region, and then everyone can go down, and then potentially someone can get in through the qualifying for the championship and then getting in. Kind of, that was always been my mindset. I've always wanted to see. Probably never see it. Now you've got them fishing all 9 events, so it doesn't really matter. You've kind of taken that away. But I would be interested to see this year a study done on if it's all the same anglers just going to all of these opens, and it won't be, because there are some that aren't going to do that because they can't afford it. It's going to be ridiculously expensive. What's the percentage of that compared to the people who are that live in those regions, that fish those regions, that maybe you're only fishing that open? And maybe Bass isn't concerned with them. Like the people that, again, it's a business. The people that are just going to fish, like for example here, just fish an event in Virginia or Maryland, one shot deal. Well, you can't go to the elites, and you're probably not going to win anyway in your open division, right? Because you've got to fish, a number of events, that, in order to be able to have a legitimate shot. So I don't know how Bass will look at that. And they, those type of anglers, but it'll be interesting to see how many of them there are next year, with the economy, and then how many actually compete in all 9 events, for the opens, and whether or not that was the right move or not. I think increasing the number of anglers is probably going to get a little bit of pushback, but it'll probably get just as much, happy from a lot of people, because there's more people can get in. I mean, the whole point is to get in there and show your stuff and compete against other anglers. These guys are competitive, so they want to compete against the best. If you don't think that you can compete against these guys, you probably don't have any business being there, right? Your mindset's got to be compete. So, again, 104 anglers in the field for Bassmaster Elite Series for 2023, mates. Going to be a great, great season. All right, I'll see you on